Stop what you're doing and pay attention, because what just went down in the U.S. Capitol in the last few hours changes everything we thought we knew about this conflict. At 2:47 Eastern today, the gavel came down 215 to 208. The House of Representatives voted to restrain a sitting president during an active military engagement. 4 members of his own party crossed the aisle to make it happen. I've been covering Washington for over a decade, and I've never seen anything unfold this fast. Here's what you need to understand before we go further. The vote itself isn't the story. What happened behind closed doors in the 72 hours leading up to it, that's the story nobody is telling tonight. If this channel isn't in your subscriptions, fix that now, because this is only the beginning. Let me break down exactly what happened, because the framing you'll see on TV will bury the real significance. The House passed a War Powers Resolution, 215 in favor, 208 against. On the surface, it looks like a routine procedure. It's not. That number means a lot. The War Powers Resolution isn't just a strongly worded letter or press release. It's a constitutional mechanism built into the American government, giving Congress the authority to check a president's military decisions. It's been around since 1973, mostly untouched, like a fire extinguisher nobody wanted to pull. Today, someone finally pulled it off the wall. Here's where it gets critical. 4 Republican members, Thomas Massie, Warren Davidson, Tom Barrett, Brian Fitzpatrick, voted with Democrats. These aren't moderates looking for compromise. Massie and Davidson, in particular, have long defended congressional authority over executive power. When members of a president's own party vote to constrain his military authority during an active engagement, it's not procedural. It's a signal. And signals in Washington always mean something bigger is moving under the surface. But here's what every major outlet is glossing over. Speaker Mike Johnson, constitutionally positioned to lead the House, dissolved the chamber and sent everyone home 2 weeks ago. A privileged resolution can't just disappear. It has to come back when members return. Johnson knew that, but chose to turn off the lights and wait. That's the level of pressure building inside that building. And today, despite delays, political cost, and opposition from House leadership, the votes were there. 215 members looked at the situation in the Middle East, looked at the constitutional question, and said, "This has gone far enough without us." That's the core event you need to hold in your mind, because what comes next reframes everything. While that vote happened, another significant event unfolded. Iran struck a military base in Kuwait, and Iranian projectiles hit a naval facility in Bahrain, where the U.S. maintains a major fleet presence. Here's the detail that stopped me. Footage, satellite images, and photos from inside Kuwait International Airport show damage that doesn't match Central Command's official statement, which claimed defensive systems worked, personnel were protected, and the threat neutralized. The images tell a different story. I'm not saying every military statement is fabricated, but when visual evidence doesn't align with the press release, that gap matters. That's where the real story lives. Wait, it gets bigger. Maersk, one of the largest shipping companies in the world, announced it's suspending all transits through the Strait of Hormuz due to unsustainable security costs, estimating an extra $500 million per month in operational expenses. When a company of that size makes that call, it's not commentary, it's a verdict. Roughly 20% of the world's oil supply moves through that strait. When global shipping giants start rerouting, costs go up, timelines stretch, supply chains absorb the pressure, and eventually that pressure hits consumers. Here's the pivot nobody is making. The vote, the strikes, and the shipping disruption all happened the same day, within hours of each other. That's not a news cycle, that's a convergence. Something shifted in the last 72 hours behind the scenes that accelerated all these events toward the same point. The question is, what was it, and who knew it was coming? The answer is in the next part, and it's not what you expect. What nobody is talking about tonight, and I want to be clear, is that what I'm about to walk you through isn't speculation. It's pattern recognition based on decades of documented congressional behavior and observable events. I'm going to show you the architecture beneath this vote, because the vote itself is just the surface. The real story is a constitutional fault line cracking for 50 years. The War Powers Resolution became law in 1973, passed over Nixon's veto by a Congress that saw executive military authority expand unchecked through Korea and Vietnam. The law was meant to restore the principle that Congress, not the president alone, decides armed conflict. After 1973, every president found ways around it: operations, existing authorizations, notifications instead of requests. Compliance was selective, and Congress largely let it slide. What changed today isn't the law, it's the willingness to use it. I reviewed footage from Trump's press conference last night, focusing on a specific exchange revealing the state of diplomacy. A reporter asked how he defines a ceasefire. Traditionally, it means a pause in hostilities agreed upon by both sides. His answer suggested ongoing exchanges at reduced intensity could still count as a ceasefire. That's not a semantic difference. It's a foundational one. If the parties define ceasefire differently, there's no ceasefire, just a slower conflict. The 4 Republicans who voted for this didn't make an impulsive choice. Massey has argued for years that the executive branch has accumulated too much military authority, and Davidson has voiced the same in hearings that barely received media coverage. These aren't protest votes. They're rooted in a constitutional philosophy building inside one wing of the GOP. Today may mark the point where that philosophy reached critical mass and became action. Every senior Republican strategist is asking, how many more think the same and are waiting? If it's more than a few, the political landscape shifts in ways the White House isn't ready for. I went back through public statements, floor speeches, and committee testimony from the 4 crossover members. They weren't reacting impulsively. They had been building toward this moment for years. That's the hidden architecture of today's vote, and it matters more than the number. Let me bring this out of Washington, out of the Capitol, out of press conferences, procedural language, because everything we've discussed so far connects directly to your life, not abstractly, not eventually. Let's start with the Strait of Hormuz. Most people hear that name and tuck it away under foreign policy, distant and theoretical. Let's dismantle that. About 20 to 21% of the world's oil supply moves through that strait every day. That's not a number to take on faith. It's documented by the U.S. Energy Information Administration. 1 in every 5 barrels of oil passes through a waterway that, at its narrowest, is roughly 21 miles wide. The difference between stable energy markets and a supply shock reverberating across every economy. When Maersk, operating over 700 vessels worldwide, decides to reroute completely, it's not a political statement, it's a mathematical one. Their actuaries, risk analysts, logistics teams ran the numbers, and staying was costlier than leaving. That calculation doesn't stay in the boardroom. It moves into shipping rates, already being repriced upward, into delivery timelines for most goods, into the cost structures of companies importing raw materials or finished products through now questioned routes. Here's where macro becomes micro. Rising shipping costs hit consumer prices, not immediately, but over weeks and months. It shows up at the pump, in utility bills, on grocery shelves, appliances, clothing, electronics. We've seen this before. In 2023 to 2024, attacks disrupted Red Sea shipping, and freight rates surged within weeks, passing costs on to consumers. The Strait of Hormuz carries far more strategic weight, so the potential effects of sustained disruption are bigger. I'm not saying a worst-case scenario is inevitable, not trying to panic you. I'm saying the risk calculus has shifted. And when it shifts at this level, global energy supply and shipping, the earliest aware are best positioned to respond. Policy uncertainty also has a cost. When Congress and the executive openly clash over the legality of an ongoing military engagement, markets price that uncertainty, investors adjust risk, energy traders build geopolitical premiums, insurance underwriters revise models. None of it is ideological, it's mechanical. Wall Street doesn't fear conflict, it fears not knowing. Right now, with a war powers vote unresolved, diplomatic definitions contested, and a major shipping corridor avoided, the level of uncertainty is extremely high. You don't need a brokerage account for this to affect you. You need gas. You need to heat your home. You need to feed your family. That's the radius of impact. Decisions in Washington over the next 30 days, in the Senate, the Oval Office, at negotiation tables, will have consequences landing in ordinary American life, not metaphorically, but mathematically. I want to be honest, I don't know how this ends. Anyone claiming certainty is guessing or selling something. What I have done is map the terrain, identify pressure points, trace lines of force in motion. 3 scenarios emerge, each plausible, each carrying consequences beyond the immediate political moment, affecting politics, economics, and strategy in ways that may show up in history books decades from now. Scenario 1. The symbolic rebuke. Trump vetoes the resolution, the most probable near-term outcome if the Senate passes it. A veto doesn't require a supermajority. Overriding it does, 2/3 in both chambers, a threshold unlikely now. Here, the resolution becomes a formal bipartisan statement, entered into congressional record, saying the legislative branch believes this military engagement exceeded legal boundaries. It sets precedent, but doesn't immediately change operational reality. Scenario 2. The pressure cooker. Some analysts suggest the resolution's real function may not be to stop the conflict directly, but to accelerate a diplomatic exit, creating enough domestic political pressure that the administration moves faster toward a negotiated framework. The vote, in this reading, is not a ceiling, but a floor, a signal that the clock in Washington is running. If this mechanism works, the resolution may achieve something the text cannot: shorten the timeline to a deal by making the cost of delay visible politically, a level of strategic politics rarely acknowledged in daily news. Scenario 3. The unknown variable. The Middle East is never a two-party negotiation. Armed factions, proxies, independent decision-makers operate outside formal chains, unconcerned with Senate votes or war powers resolutions. One significant escalation, one strike, one miscalculation, one retaliatory action could render the first 2 scenarios irrelevant in 24 hours. History doesn't ask permission before accelerating. That's the variable no analyst can model, making the next 30 days genuinely unpredictable in a way unpredictable doesn't fully capture. Here's where I leave you, not with conclusions, but a question. 3 scenarios: a symbolic rebuke that sets precedent without changing the ground, a pressure mechanism accelerating diplomacy, or an outside event that resets everything overnight. Which are you watching? Drop your answer in the comments below, because the discussion in this community matters to me just as much as anything I say in front of the camera. And if you stayed with me through this entire breakdown, thank you. I genuinely mean that. This is the kind of work that matters to me. Subscribe right now if you haven't already, and turn on notifications, because when the Senate vote happens, when the White House responds, and when the next major development breaks, you'll want to be here when it happens. I'll see you in the next one.